What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Yours Truly podcast. I'm your host, Christian Baxter, and today I have an awesome episode in store for you all. We're going to be speaking with Adam and Wambui. Adam and Wambui are married. They were on Paul Vanderklay's live stream a few Fridays ago for his estuary live stream, and I could just tell that they were very excited and interested in what they've been experiencing in this little corner of the internet. Adam said that he had been having some conversations with Jordan Hall and with Gray Hamilton, and that he's been paying attention for a while now. And so I thought I would reach out and ask if they would be interested in having a rando. So what's interesting about this conversation is that Wambui is in Africa, Adam is in Hawaii, and I am in Arkansas. And we're going to be having this synced up today as the digital has collapsed time and distance for us. So that's really cool. Look forward to kind of digging into their story, seeing what they're all about, and more about why their attention has been captured here. So don't forget, if you want to support the channel, give it a like, give this video a like if you want to support this rando for Adam and Wambui, and become a subscriber. And if you want to support the work of this channel, we have channel memberships. There's 3 different tiers, and it's just about what you feel like you are able to support. However, if you do a top level support, I'll reach out for a one-on-one conversation, and very open to having that. So if that's something that sounds interesting to you, become a supporter. And so without any further delay, I'm excited today to give you Adam and Wambui here in this little.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. And we are recording. So
Excellent.
Adam informed me that his actual pronunciation of his name is Autumn, spelled like Adam, but then when you came into the church and were baptized, you took the spiritual name Adam, like from Genesis.
Yeah.
And so it's okay if I've already got one name that I'm really trying to like focus on in this. Keep that simple Western pronunciation.
Yeah.
So I said in the intro, I've been plucking people for randos out of Paul's estuary live streams on Fridays. I was telling you, I did that with Gray Hamilton. I had another guy that I've reached out to Paul a couple of times, and that's who I'll ask him, are you okay to give me these people's email? And he usually obliges. And so, and I guess that's part of the thing about coming on to his live streams. You have to give your email to be on those, kind of his filter for anons or something like that. You have to at least give me an email. But anyway, so yeah, we're going to start today. Just want to like hear y'all's story. And I'm going to start by asking Wambui, if you want to just kind of tell us about where you came from, the house you grew up in, the home you grew up in, how we find ourselves here today. And then we'll toss it over to Adam or whenever it makes sense to intersect. But let's start with you today.
Okay. It's a really long story, so I'm going to try and keep it as concise as possible.
It's okay.
But I was born in Nairobi, Kenya, to my 2 parents, who both had pretty Catholic upbringings. And I have a younger brother who's about 3 years younger than me, 2.5. So when I was 6 years old, because of my mum's job, we moved to the UK, to a town kind of like outside of London, but just my brother and I and my mum for her work. But my dad stayed in Kenya. So my home was kind of split apart from that point, which was pretty early on. And my mum's job required her to travel a lot. So I would say that was probably, in my mind, the most defining feature of my early upbringing is that my parents weren't around that much. And that's not to, that happens sometimes. It's not to like fault them. But I think it was defining and significant. From that point on, I was very much like left to my own devices in some way. And so as much as my mom's family and my dad's family, like both my grandmothers are extremely involved in their Catholic churches, my parents weren't, there wasn't any insistence that I necessarily participate. Although there would be times when, especially before we moved, so like until I was 6, where I remember, and then when we'd go back to Kenya during the summers and whatever, there was a period I remember when my parents were kind of maybe worried that they'd messed up in some way by not insisting on some kind of firm religious frame. I don't know if their mums told them off or something, but there was a period I remember when they were very insistent that I go to church, and I had at that point taken a really hard stance that I didn't want to. Like I remember going to Sunday school at some point and just being extremely confused at first, and then angry about the fact that my questions weren't being answered in the way that I wanted them to be. And it was very much like a because I said so kind of thing. And so I just have a memory of sitting in the car while my whole family went into this Catholic church. And this happened on subsequent like weekends. And they wouldn't let me stay home because they thought I just wanted to watch TV or something instead of go to church. But it was actually like, no, I don't want to go in there. I don't like what's going on in that building. So I would just stay in the car for hours on my own. So that was early. And then I went to boarding school when I was 11. And it was a boarding school in the UK. It was, I guess, Anglican, like Church of England. And we actually went to chapel every single day in the morning. And then for a longer time on Saturdays and Sundays. But I remember having absolutely no connection to it. Like I remember refusing to sing the hymns and refusing to say the creed and stuff. Like I just wouldn't. So I just want to, I guess, emphasize that it wasn't a passive dismissal or something. It was a really active no.
Conscious.
To anything Christian. Yeah, I was very conscious even when I was really young. And then, well, like, long story short, lots of years happened. I got kicked out of that boarding school. I went to a different one that was very, very different, very secular. Actually, like I've described it before to Adam as like social justice warrior training camp. It was this very experimental, kind of activist centered international school in Wales, where there were about 300 students in like 100 and something different nationalities. And the point of it was to like foster world peace, which sounded like a possible aim to me at that point. So from that point on, I was quite convinced, I guess, by that ideology. So I went to that, a religion, I could even call it. It was very much like proto-woke. And
yeah, what year? So you went to the Anglican school at 11, and then you went to this international school. How old?
16.
Okay.
So 16 to 18 years old. And then after that, I went to college. I took a gap year and worked in Kenya for a year. And then I went to college in New York. And I went to NYU. I went to the smallest, there's many different like individual colleges, I guess, within the broader university. So I went to the one, it's a school of individualized study. It's very, like nothing. People ask me what I got my undergrad degree, and I say like nothing in particular. It doesn't even make sense to me. I have no idea. I studied something to do with post-colonialism and art theory. couldn't tell you what that means even now, but I did get into writing or figure out that that's something I enjoyed and was pretty good at. Just in that school, you could take classes within any of the other schools. So there really was like no set of classes you had to take for your major or anything. You could just do whatever. So I remember doing like an Indian religions class. I remember doing a lot of photography and like different writing classes and post-colonial studies and all kinds of stuff. So Adam and I actually met at in an intro to fiction and poetry class, like halfway through that. And then throughout that whole time and until about, was it like 2 years ago, Adam, that we started talking about Jesus? 3, 2.5.
So what year did you graduate college?
2018.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I went to grad school in San Diego and then taught at UCSD. I was teaching writing. I wrote like a manuscript for an experimental nonfiction book. But throughout that time, just to say, I was really, like, I did a yoga teacher training course. I explored like Sufism and like Vedic philosophy. But it was really, I used to say, which is a crazy thing now that I think about it, but when people would ask me, I'd say, you know how when you're trying to make a blog or a website, there's all these templates that they give you, or you can just choose to put your own thing together and pick from this and pick from that and design it yourself. And I was like, so I think the better thing is to make a really, I can't think of the word, but like design my own religion or philosophy from scratch. I don't want to adhere to any strict template. And so every kind of thing. I was into, I read a lot of like mythology. And then a couple years ago, Adam and I had been together for 4 years and then not spoken for another 4 years. If that math adds up, I really I can't remember, but something like that. And then we started talking again as friends, and largely when we really started talking, and this was all online, by the way, because I was in Kenya by this time, he was in Hawaii. But
so she started talking as friends, right? She started.
Oh no, that feeling was mutual.
Okay.
That feeling was mutual.
All right.
There was a zero chance on either side.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going.
So yeah, this is probably getting like too far away from the question, but I'm nearly done. I had a moment of, I guess I would say, not even hearing, an inkling that I should explore like this Jesus character. And I started reaching out more to anyone in my life I knew who could like give me some insight into what that meant. I'd like talk to my grandmothers more. And then I also had a few friends who I just knew from seeing that it was in their Instagram bio or something like that. Well, I hadn't spoken to anyone really about Christianity. So the 3 or 4 people that it occurred to me to reach out to, and I literally sent them messages saying, I have this weird thing about Jesus. I have no idea. Like, I just need some guidance on what to do next. And Adam and I started talking, and then he answered a lot of my questions. And I went to a bunch of different Christian churches in Nairobi and went to the Orthodox Church because Adam was a catechumen at that point. And I went back. I went once. I was like, absolutely not. This is the weirdest thing I've ever experienced in my life. And then I went another time, and again, was like, I don't even know why I came back. And then a third time, and then a fourth time. And for some reason, I kept going back. And that time, I actually started talking to people in that like congregation. And little by little, I kept going back. And so I got baptized a year ago. And that's that's the story.
Well, I'm kind of curious because of this being raised Catholic, and then you go to Anglican school, but then the Orthodox Church was weird. it's why was it more weird than those worship experiences that you had growing up in those pretty traditional settings? I would assume that they were fairly traditional.
Yeah. The feeling I got was that this thing that I was walking into had absolutely nothing to do with me. And I was welcome, but not in any active way. I mean, even when I'd gone to Catholic churches growing up, and maybe just because I was a child, there was more, I was being let in by somebody. There were people that were saying hello and really trying to encourage me to step in further. And in this case, yeah, people were going about their business and what was happening. And it was absolutely, there was no, what's like encouragement, but more aggressive.
Proselytization, evangelism, in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There was no hint of that. And also the church I go to here, it's a Greek Orthodox church in Nairobi, but the service is in Swahili, English, Greek, a couple other local languages. So really, like, I didn't know what was happening. Even when I'd gone to Catholic church, it was all in English. And I didn't know the order of the service. It wasn't clear to me. The people were standing up. People were kissing icons and lighting candles and coming in and out. And there were kids running around. And it just felt extremely foreign. And I remember being really worried that I would do something wrong. I just really had no idea. So that's, I guess, why I would say it still felt very foreign.
And it's interesting. I've been to a couple of Orthodox services, and that you said it wasn't about me, or they weren't trying to like cater to me. And and it's like, no, this is what this is. You're welcome to be here. And it's a very different kind of mindset. Like you were saying, they weren't trying to like hook you in with something. And I do think that because of how intensely Gen Z has been marketed to, like just the frame that there is a reality to, you just sense that immediately, and you're just kind of like, I mean, this has been happening my whole life, and so I definitely think that's interesting, and it's the part where you said, I started having these thoughts, or heard this kind of voice, whatever we want to call that experience, about wanting to connect with Christ, that you were looking for people where you could make that personal connection, and yet you were brought up within these Christian institutions, but you didn't feel like that was the avenue by which to meet Christ in relationship. It was with, people that you knew or trusted. And there's just a lot of dynamics at play in our culture right now with how all those things are playing out. I just found that very fascinating. You were even just like, if somebody had like, I love Jesus in my Instagram profile, it's like, tell me more about that, what was, instead of like looking to those institutions, you were looking for these people, I think. And I don't know if there was anything else you would want to say.
Yeah, just that there was I don't remember any kind of connection with Jesus in as much as I had to, go to church every day or go to chapel every day for years when I was in that boarding school. And even when I was growing up, like I never once felt compelled or encouraged or anything to develop a personal relationship with Jesus for some reason. That just never came up. And also the other thing I wanted to say about going into the Orthodox Church, it felt like nothing was trying to come down to me. Like I had to come up to meet something. And even before I understood what was happening or understood any of the theology or anything, I just really got this sense of, right, like here's a call to adventure. Like it's entirely up to you whether or not you want to come up and meet this, but there's nothing that's going to necessarily come down and cater to your. And I was really sick of myself by that point. I really that was extremely appealing. that this had nothing to do with me.
And
Even
that-
if I didn't have the language for it, I was like sick of thinking about myself, talking about myself. Like I just, yeah.
So it's an interesting conversation related to identity that you're kind of
Mhm.
pointing to with, you know, you were baked in the soup of identity politics, but it's about like individual identity, like so individual. And then it's like, is there a shared identity, and what does it mean to have something that's just not ultimately about me all the time? I mean, there's a lot there. I think that's fascinating. Adam,
You got it right both ways.
I have to think about it because I had a girlfriend when I was really young whose name was Autumn, like Autumn. And that's how I'm like, remember, say it like Autumn.
That's pretty good. It works.
So, yeah, man. So you guys connected later on, and we'll get back to that connection. But like, let's talk, you know, and I actually, you know, I didn't say this in the recording part. I said it in the intro so people generally will understand that y'all are married at this point. And so, and if people saw you on Paul's live stream, that was obviously mentioned. But so I just want to bring that in at this point in the conversation if people are just now joining us on, say, the live premiere. But yeah, go ahead, man. Tell us about your story, how you grew up, and then we'll kind of get into you'll lead us into kind of how we find ourselves onto this internet space and this corner of the internet, that kind of thing.
Okay, cool. I will do that. Well, boy, do you mind muting just because I'm getting a teeny bit of feedback? Yeah. It's not that bad, but just a little. So yeah, I grew up here. I'm in Honolulu, Hawaii right now. Homeboy is still in Nairobi. I grew up an only child. My father is a third or fourth generation, depending on how you count it, Filipino. And we're from a large sort of Filipino, Samoan, Japanese, even Hawaiian family. And my mother is a white lady, or haole, from Chicago. My father was very actively involved in his Episcopalian church. He was what you call the senior warden, which is like the chief administrative position. And my mother was also very involved in her Unity Church, which is not a Unitarian church. It's a whole, they would describe themselves as pan-denominational. And my parents very much wanted me to find my own way. I did go to my dad's Episcopalian church most Sundays, I think, until I was like 11 or 12 years old. And I also attended the elementary school there. My father actually facilitated the sale of that school to a larger private school. And I attended that school like K through 12 my whole life. So I went to one school that was very intimately involved with my dad's church. And I mentioned on Paul's live stream that like my parents very much wanted me to find my own way. And of course that was militant atheism. I don't know when that started. I want to say I think I always associate it with Reddit, but I think that was happening like long before Reddit, probably when I was 11 or 12. But the fact of it is I had never taken Christianity or actually any of the sort of, there's a lot of spiritualism in the air in Honolulu. We have a like very deep sort of Buddhist and a very deep Eastern presence here. It's not like there's temples everywhere and like practicing people, but there is just a sense in the air of that and a certain like Hawaiian and Polynesian paganism that like you are educated about in school very early on. So there is like, it's a spiritually rich environment. Like I probably would have told you even at my most militantly atheistic phase that like I believed in ghosts. Like there was no, like ghost stories are just such a part of the culture here. Like there is a supernatural element to living here. So let me see if I can thread this needle back in. So I had never taken like religion all that seriously. And I remember even when I saw the hypocrisy, like I saw the hypocrisy of, you know, how unchristian Christians were. I remember trying to like take my rage and fury and project it onto the people at my dad's church when I was 11 or 12. And I just couldn't. Like I remember sitting in the pews there thinking like, you know, all sorts of nasty things about these people and their myths. but I was like, these people have been nothing but like kind to me. Like I get along with the kids there. We never even talk about Jesus, really. Like the whole thing was, it was very dissonant for me. And there's one more thing I wanted to mention about all that. I also grew up, like, I think probably by the time I was 9 or 10, I had a scholarship to study the pipe organ. So I played pipe organ in church, especially on, not every Sunday, but like holidays, whatever. They always wanted the kid to like play the liturgy. So I was like very actively involved in that regard. Anyhow, I went to this aforementioned K through 12 private high school, very art centric. I was very much encouraged, not just by my family, but also by my school and my community at large, to pursue vocation. And I felt like most of my peers, at least the people I hung out with, and we were privileged enough to actually do that, we were all encouraged to really like follow our hearts, which I think is worth mentioning in the context of the greater narrative here. But yes, I was largely secular. I think perhaps typically or exceptionally debaucheristic and hedonistic for American teenagers. I we grew up upper middle class, a lot of wealthy kids partying, and we had a lot of power and opportunity at our fingertips. So it was very rich and exciting adolescence. And wow, I'm losing my train of thought here. I should also mention throughout this that I have undiagnosed bipolar disorder. So there's a sense of the like shamanic reality like bursting through at moments all the time through my adolescence. And at the same time, there's this deeply held sort of aggressive, cynical secularism. But, I had moments or months of like such extreme synchronicity that there's no denying a transcendent aspect to reality. And it was very hard for me to hold those things in tension. Then I went to NYU, where I was actually very explicitly aware of my ontology or lack thereof. Like from the time I was 17 or 18, I actually remember going to a shrink. I've seen that same shrink since I was like 13 years old, and she's wonderful, and I've mostly nothing but nice things to say about her. But I remember a conversation I had with her when I was 16 or 17, and I could kind of look at the material outline of my life and say, I have these domains. I have my creative work as an artist. I have my friends. I have school, blah, blah, blah. And there's no spinal column, but there's something that's not binding them together. And I think she meant very well when she told me this. She said, well, and I actually said, like, I think I need a God. Like I need a central unifying principle. And I remember she told me, and I don't know why she told me this, but she said, you don't need a God. Like your love for your friends can be your God. Just a very interesting and strange thing to say. But anyways, I got to college, and I used to tell people in my freshman and sophomore year, I used to tell a lot of my peers, like, no, you need to like find your delusion and stick to it. I understood that there was like some natural axiom of faith at the bottom of everything. And like we were in like woke Central University, right? I was in the art school, and one boy was in Gallatin School of Individualized Studies. So like the postmodern neo-Marxist thing is just consuming everyone. And I remember being very aware that I had a worldview, and that I was intentionally, to the best of my ability, constructing it from all the, this three-legged Frankenstein dog from like all these different pieces of culture. I was pretty influenced by the sort of Silicon Valley ethos and guys like Tim Ferriss. And even by the time I was 18 or something, I at least had a very pragmatic relationship with meditation, which I essentially saw as anxiolytic, because I was extremely anxious and extremely distressed. And I remember being very aware of something like teleology in my life. Like the point of my life was to optimize my time for something. And being very fiercely secular, being very fiercely cynical about the rising current of feminism and identity politics in the water. And something, one boy and I met, and I think that exploded both of our mutual non-ontologies. And
something. What does that mean?
Well, I guess this is funny because I to go through like a linear narrative of how that whole period played out. I guess the most honest way I can say it is that period of basically from the time I was 17 to 21, which is when we graduated college, was a period of deep, extended chaos and suffering. That's the most honest way of putting it. So if I'm just going to like list out the grievances here, I personally, I'll speak for myself and not one boy, but I was dealing with undiagnosed bipolar disorder. While I was in high school, I had a sexual relationship with a teacher that was still, very fresh and unaddressed. Then and to this day, I still deal with another chronic neurological condition, best known as narcolepsy, but it's a lot of symptoms and like pretty bad sleep apnea. So I was like physically unhealthy, spiritually unhealthy, emotionally unhealthy. And of course the worldview that is being enforced by the urban monoculture or MD, it's probably not MDT. I don't think it ever really was MDT for us, or MTD. Yeah. For us, like we were living deeply in chaos, or I should speak only for myself, but there was just this sense of being very physically unhealthy, living a very hedonistic lifestyle with my peers, college itself not being much of, being sort of anti-structural, and deeply, deeply seeking for peace and meaning. And I think when I met one boy in 2016, 10 years ago almost, I could tell she was experiencing that depth of suffering. I don't know if it was salvific suffering yet, but she also was experiencing pain and a deep lack of peace. And it showed, and it was like reality shining forth at me, a reality I was experiencing and unable to admit to myself. So that's the something. And from that, from our early relationship, my world started to open up to, or my perspective started to open up into new ways of seeing. So maybe I can put a pin in that. Does that explain the something?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I mean, that there was just, I mean, the way that y'all are describing, I just want to reflect back a little bit of what, how I'm hearing what y'all are saying so far, because you made that distinction right at the end about the moralistic therapeutic deism didn't even feel like it existed for you guys, maybe because y'all were basically post-Christian in y'all's environments and upbringing, highly secularized, Anglicanism with your mom's kind of, more or less kind of a Unitarian substructure. And then the same, I guess, one boy talking about just kind of an empty religion and then being thrust into, from 16 till you through grad school, you were in the postmodern neo-Marxist soup. And what Adam, what you really said about, you even said college was anti-structural. And this is like a, anti-colonial, like post-structuralism, like that's like the whole philosophy. And how do you build life? How do you build and cultivate something without some form of, a garden isn't like a garden. It's not going to be like this, like highly ordered, like necessarily like you can do the greenhouse thing, but but you can still see that it's a garden. You can still see that this is this, and this is this, and this, and this has, and to feel like you were, our culture was thrusting chaos upon your life in that kind of way. And we're going to guess kind of hear the rest of the story of coming out of chaos. But, from the American South, like, I mean, you could, there's like a dip in a sense of like what's happened in culture, but like, it's almost like it's possible, like the dip has happened and the moralistic therapeutic deism kind of like held in certain parts of the country in a sense, in a kind of way, you know, evangelical South and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So that's been like mine. So it's very fascinating and enlightening to continue to hear stories of people that are, you know, 10, 15 years younger than me that really, in a real sense, felt like they grew up in almost, even though you were around Christian symbol, but you were not within Christian culture. Something along those lines. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, man, let's keep going where your story, and then kind of like, I guess, how you guys got continued to cultivate your relationship, and then how you found yourself on a Paul Vanderlei Clay live stream and talking to Jordan Hall and Gray and everything, and wondering, like Wambui, wondering how do we look into the culture at players that sometimes are seen as, you know, this was what you brought into the conversation on Paul's stream about, I can't remember the word, kind of the oracles of the culture that sometimes are looked upon as crazy or these things, but is it okay to acknowledge that there might be something, that there might be truth to parts of things? Of how do we make sense? It's all these things of how we're making sense of life today. So keep going with the story, Adam.
Okay. So I'm actually going to do some processing on in real time here, because
Go for it.
You really got the neurons firing. Usually I have my little sermons, and I've told these stories so many times, but what's come to mind is there's this dichotomy and disparity in that you just said something like, well, we both grew up in post-Christian worlds. And that's not entirely true, because as I've come to speculate recently, Honolulu, or Hawaii in general, is in some sense what may be the most deeply Christian place on earth, not nominally, but it's what I've remarked to, I think, Gray at times and Jordan, is that we have something like baseline agapic modeling at state scale. Yep. It is possible for me to go out onto the street in Honolulu, and maybe, let's say conservatively, 20 or 30% of the people I can, through shibboleths, efficiently and effectively commune under a shared aloha spirit almost immediately with people out on the street. So as far as feeling embedded and belonging in an environment where people care about me, where people love me, not just at the family level, but also at the neighborhood level, and then just with strangers on the street, we have a deep sense of belonging to the place. And I've always been aware of that and appreciated that. I did not recognize it as I'm speculating, but I do suspect it's a deeply Christian phenomenon. And we have this multiculturalism, which I'm going to put in scare quotes here, in which everybody looks like me, mixed, weird. There's the Family Guy joke, I can't tell if these people are Black or Asian. Like, there's a deep sense of multiculturalism, of tolerance, of like everything that the sort of civil rights movement promised here. And there's this deep sense of belonging to a place and loving the people around you. And then going to New York and being embedded in the postmodern soup, that world, or at least that world that I was in, which is a pocket of it, and that world that Wambui and I were in, purports to nominally do the exact same things. We're going to bring together people from different cultures, different backgrounds, put them on a literal island in New York City, and we are going to commune and celebrate our diversity. And yet, so it's nominally trying to do that. And it really felt for me like a satanic inversion of what I grew up with. And I'm not saying what I grew up with was anyway perfect or the ideal church, but there is that, I guess satanic inversion is like the best way I can put it. And it was living in that tension that was a major contributor to the spiritual turmoil I experienced during those years. That being in an environment that putatively served inclusivity in a way, when I knew what I knew what not inclusivity was like, but I knew what it was like to grow up in a place with deep communion across cultures, which I don't think is actually true. So you asked me to continue on how we met and how that unfolded, but I wanted
Yeah,
to
well, that's
voice that.
I think, I guess the curious question for me, and I'd like y'all to both share this part. And I I think that your point's apt. Regard that something like abstracted DEI, or like we're, you know, kind of we can talk about like, oh yeah, we'll preach that sermon, but you almost get that same sense of hypocrisy or kind of religious gaslighting, like, yeah, but he's not really acting like that, but we're all saying that that's what we are, you know, or something along those lines. And so when you've experiencing something more true, something more actual related to multicultural synthesis, you know, within its bounds and limits, like you're talking about Japan, Polynesian, Filipino, like, you know, with some Western influence, like there's difference there, but the difference is within a certain scale at the same time that sometimes we just say that the postmodern says it's all like, oh, you can just have as much difference as you want and it'll be just fine. So, you know, I think that that's an interesting aspect of it. But yeah, I guess what kind of brought y'all were in that. And then Wambui, you said, you know, you had that kind of a spiritual experiences that was kind of drawing you out of that. What kind of drew you guys out of that? What drew you out of that and towards Christ, Adam? And how did we get to this place?
So here what I'll say, I'll try to get the chronology straight here. So I finished college in 2017. Wambui finished in 2018. At the time, I was involved with 2 different startups, one of which I was sort of involved on the early stages, based out of San Diego. And I was requested to move to San Diego to get this show on the road. And Wambui very graciously agreed to come along with me. And she entered into a MFA program at UCSD, which my company at the time was spun out of a lab at UCSD. And that was sort of our way of drying out, of escaping the chaos of New York in some real way. I had personally no desire to be in Southern California, but it just felt like, I actually felt a very strong resistance to it. But it was like, I was thinking very practically. I was like, I need a job. This is what smart young guys do, is they build companies, they make $1 billion, and then they go back and make their art or whatever. And if you want to talk about like one place worse than the like postmodern soup of art school in New York City, I would suggest Silicon Valley. Like, this sort of deepened. I had such a, and I don't mean to trivialize or criticize any of the young guys and friends I was working with at the time. Certainly a lot of good intentions there and interesting technology and fun, formative experiences, but I was just not personally cut out for that world. And I was just in too much physical, emotional, spiritual turmoil to really buy into the capital-oriented ontology that was being sold at the time. But basically, I had a very, I guess traumatic is the word. I had an extremely stressful experience becoming CEO of a crypto company spinoff that had a very high valuation at the peak of the 2017 crypto boom. Wambui and I were flying like back and forth from the Cayman Islands to New York City to California and Hawaii. And it was just this like crazy jet setting, very sort of on paper glamorous life that was absolutely destroying my soul. And at the sort of zenith of all of that, I was, I guess the official term is laid off. It certainly didn't feel that way. I was laid off after like 6 months after moving our lives across the country. And I was like a complete, utter mess and nightmare. And dysfunctional, like extraordinarily anxious, chronically, irritable. My narcolepsy was unaddressed, deeply traumatized from my experience in high school. And I just started to unpack all these things. And very quickly, the world became explicitly spiritual. And that was actually mainly through, developing for the first time in my life, a regular yoga practice, and then kind of taking Sam Harris much more seriously and entering into what I might call like a non-dual ontology more formally, and deciding there was a spiritual aspect of life, and really just being open to any of the books that would have made me immediately, the books that used to disgust me on my mom's bookshelf. She was very new age and had all sorts of manifestation. I was so utterly broken at that point in like late 2018, early 2019, that I just opened the spiritual floodgates, like ate from the buffet, and started to take, especially like non-dual Dzogchen type meditation very seriously. And I kind of want to let Wambui like take this part of the story, because she might be able to do it more eloquently and probably take some parts that or fill in some parts that I'm missing. But around 2019, I personally just like started to meditate 1 to 5 hours a day.
Wow.
Very intensely. So can I hand off to you here, Wambui? Do you feel comfortable?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
So many things. So I think probably some of that was implicitly spurred on by me. Like I started doing yoga and meditating when I was really young, like a year before I went to boarding school. So I was like 9 years old or something. That's another weird long story. But even when I was in boarding school, and then I did like a teacher training when I was on my gap year when I was 17, 18. But it was always like yoga was always, and meditation were always these like anchor points in my life. But yeah, just when Adam kind of reached how would you describe it? Like the rock bottom of this Silicon Valley, like ostensible dream reality, and then left his job or got laid off, and then started meditating a lot. Anyway, it opened up a different side of the reality of this practice that I'd been doing in this sort of personal way. It is helpful. It is helpful to learn how to breathe in certain ways and to do these movements. And but I would say by the time we broke up a couple or a year later, I don't want to describe it wrong, Adam, but I did feel like you were disconnected from our realities, were like pretty disconnected. And then I would also say that while Adam was working in this company, in this tech company, I went to grad school to do this MFA in writing. It was a complete accident. I was looking for a way to move to San Diego with my boyfriend, and I looked at potential jobs, but I was quite limited because of my visa status. Like I had to be in school pretty much. So I looked up like MFA programs that are free, and there happened to be one. It was not free. It was free labor to be a teaching assistant.
Right.
But yeah, whatever, for what it's worth, like it was, but I kind of landed there and I was like, oh, wow, this is a whole thing. Like people, these people really want to be professional writers and are taking this extremely seriously. And there's a whole, the only thing I can call it is like religion that exists in this place that is nothing. I was engulfed in like the woke postmodern soup at NYU, but it was nothing compared to what I experienced in grad school. And this was also around the time that, we went through like George Floyd and BLM and all of this while I was still in that world. But even before that, it was just the worst case scenario of that. I feel personally like very victimized by that whole ideology, mainly because, and mainly like maybe Adam, you can explain this better. We had a conversation the other day, kind of drawing parallels of creating. You mentioned it, like it feels like the fallen state, or like I can't remember the language you used, but yeah, I feel like it was not only it didn't just not feel quite right. I think I incurred a lot of damage from really trying my best to engage in good faith in an environment that was promising, like,
Well,
what?
yeah. So I'm remembering the conversation that you just referenced. So, we're going to get kind of high concept here, but estuary is a form of like schole. Leisure is the Greek translation, but that's the root of scholastics in school. And what's happening on a good estuary is this good faith attempt to enter into dialogos or trialogos or whatever. And what I think Wambui encountered in grad school, and even I encountered in undergrad, was a fallen version of that. It's actually the inversion of that form. So I think in our conversation earlier, Wambui was expressing that she incurred a lot of damage, basically encountering this satanic form of scholastic discussion for years at a time. Is that what you wanted to reference?
Exactly. Yeah.
What do you feel like that does to your mind?
Oh my gosh. Well, the good news is I was never able to completely buy in. And I always took that as a personal, I just thought I wasn't as smart as I needed to be, or there was something wrong with me for not being able to keep up with all this academic language and be super bought into these ideas about diversity and use all of the language that would make everyone feel comfortable and safe spaces and all of this. I always was just, I now would say I was very switched off. I tried my best to perform belonging in this environment, but I really was kind of not even halfway in. And at the time I felt just depressed. I felt like I wasn't connected to anything in particular. But I think there was a part of me that was trying to protect me from fully buying into that, because I could just tell, I didn't have it in me to drink the Kool-Aid.
But during that time, if this is in the late teens, it was kind of, as young people in those kind of hyper left cultures, it was like, what do I do if I step out of this? What if I do if I'm not that? And because, even for a guy in Arkansas, I felt cultural pressure. Am I going to put a black image on my Instagram? What are people going to think if I don't? That I'm a racist. I'm already from Arkansas, so there was so much cultural pressure, and if you're in it, I can't even. And that's your whole community. That's your whole life. That just seems very. But that that does happen in other environments, even labeled Christian environments. These things can happen. And Adam, to what you were saying about, I had this conversation with Ross Bird about kind of confession and these kind of accountability groups, things that kind of happen that in some sense are kind of like if you would got into kind of a grievance group, you're kind of just performative piety within those settings sometimes. And in a certain way, I mean, they kind of do come from different places, but there's something there about trying to really get into an authentic conversation, authentic dialogue that isn't where you don't feel like you're trying to hide, something true about yourself for the sake of the orthodoxy at hand or something like that. So I don't know, Adam, if you were.
Yeah, well, this has been really helpful because Boy and I have never been through this entire narrative together. It's just, I thought I would be able to speak very articulately about all of this, but I'm doing the processing in real time. And that question you just asked actually gave me a bit of a epiphany, which is what happens when you're in a deep orthodoxy in a hyper woke environment or whatever, and you choose not to drink the Kool-Aid is, for me, I'll speak for myself, but you go insane. That's actually what happened to me.
Exactly.
Is I functionally went insane. I looked at the world. So if we take the example of 2019, and this is the sort of the chaotic end of what we jokingly refer to as our first marriage. But if that period, I looked at my Silicon Valley world, which is a sort of abstraction. It's a certain mutation of MTD with with Yuval Harari's eschatology. And then I looked at Wambui's world, which was a sort of Everclear version of whatever I encountered at NYU. And I said, neither of these things are for me. And those were the two ontologies on order for me. And so I just went inward and like spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically imploded. And I think that is actually the answer. I mean, you can look at someone even excommunicated from Scientology. If they don't deconstruct to MTD, it's very likely that they'll have something like maybe not a psychotic break, but like something close to it. Like anybody deconstructing from a total institution that doesn't have the leisure of deconstructing into
the kind of cultural
larger arena.
Yeah.
I think that is actually not, I think that's the definition of losing it. Now, in the long run, I think that's a step towards a deeper reality. But for me, it was, I went insane. And I don't, Wambui,
yeah, I would say I went insane in a different way. I mean, I would have said that we were both extremely mentally ill. I don't know that I would use that language anymore. But Adam,
spiritually sick. Is that what you would use now?
Extremely, but kind of, spiritually sick and just so out of alignment with reality. And I give like a lot of, I put a lot of faith in this voice in me that throughout my entire life has rarely known what the thing is, but has a really strong sense of not this. And so a lot of the time I'm able to just, I have to learn to trust the not this. But when you don't know, you don't even have any version of what this could be. And I can't stress enough how much Christianity was not an option on the table for me. It didn't even occur to me remotely that this could be a thing too. I went down every other version of every other religion in some weird way, but it just was not an option on the table for me. And it wasn't until I started talking to Adam again as friends and had this moment with, which I'll just explain that really quickly because it's kind of funny. Like I was on the floor of a mental hospital crying and just really and throughout my, at least adolescence and early adult life, would sometimes hear this voice in my head that would just say oh my God, you need Jesus. But it was a joke. It was like a funny, silly thing that my friends and I would even say to each other.
Yeah.
But then there was this moment on the floor of this mental hospital where the same words, but it actually felt real. It was you need Jesus. And I was oh, okay. And that was what kicked off this whole exploration. But just quickly, so Adam encouraged me first to start to try and pray, because I always thought I was praying, but I was praying to this kind of mutant earth mother goddess thing, and I was really insistent that I couldn't be a man because I have sexual trauma from men, and I'm trying to be a feminist even though I didn't really believe in any of that stuff deep down. But he was just try and direct your prayer towards the male, and then it was okay, try saying Jesus, and then it slowly led from that. But also he encouraged me to watch Jordan Peterson's what was it, the
biblical lecture series?
The first one, I guess.
And what year was this?
Probably 23. 23.
Yeah.
So I'll try to fill in the gap here.
Yeah, please.
2019, I got super into the meditation, blah, blah, blah. And then we had both been following Peterson like since 2017 or 2016, but we had broken up by 2020, and I didn't actually look at the biblical lectures until 2020. And around 2020, I started to say I could act like a Christian. I don't know if I can ever believe this stuff, but I could behave as someone who believes in God, which was a common pitch. And then I guess in 23, it was probably about 2023. Yeah, I encouraged you to.
Yeah. I'd left the US by then by like force because my visa ran out and I couldn't keep teaching at this university. And I was just desperate enough, I guess. And I was stuck in this place I didn't want to be in. And I had all this mental health stuff. And I felt really doomed and willing to try anything. And then Adam was probably the one person who my ex-boyfriend, who there was no world in which we were going to get back together. Like, it was the worst. It was second to becoming Christian. It was the last thing that was ever going to happen. But I had these questions suddenly, especially watching this lecture series about trying to relate some of that to my early experiences with Christianity. And Adam was the only person that could answer my questions in a way that felt sufficient. And anyway, I just remember that there was a moment where I understood that truth was a real thing, like reality was a thing. And that was probably the moment where everything changed, because it was the exact opposite thing that I'd been trying to force myself to believe for all those years. I was knee deep in all of that.
That reality is what you can make, not something that is. Like that reality, you make the way, there isn't a way.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't just this liberating idea of realities, whatever you want to make it. It was like, you're actually not allowed to believe that there is such a thing as reality. You have to be accepting of whatever anyone else's reality is. And that was the emphasis the entire time. And I'll pass it on to you, Adam, because I know I have not followed a thread at all. But I also just want to emphasize that during that time, we were in this weird position of, I was one of very few Black people and Black women in these academic spaces where all that was emphasized constantly was that there was a reason for everyone to kind of make this a safe space for people like me and not be offensive to people like me. And there was a moment in grad school where I was like, I don't feel comfortable. I'm the only Black person in this room full of white people. Not that those labels were like super important to me anymore, but at the time I was like, and I feel uncomfortable talking about race. I don't think I'm going to use the right words. Like, I'm scared to discuss race in this room because I don't think I'm going to use the right words. Where that was also like clarifying, like, oh, this isn't about anything that they're saying that it is about. This is a weird cult or religion that I don't understand. And then Adam, this whole time too, was like, I couldn't bring him to a dinner with the other people in my grad school class because he just would say all the things that you weren't supposed to say. Like, he'd be, like saying all the words you weren't supposed to say, just honestly blurting out his honest opinions. And in those rooms, there was this gasp, like the air left the room every time Adam would open his mouth, because he would just tell the truth about how he was feeling. But then he had this Black long-term girlfriend, so everybody was confused by us. And I think we were lucky to have each other as these islands in all of that madness that kind of acted as like, I don't know, but I imagine that Adam clearly wasn't racist because but everyone was telling him this. And I also just had this injection of reality in talking to Adam that was a real like oasis away from this world I was super like trapped in grad school and before that.
So you started watching the Peterson stuff. Adam was being himself. So you were still in those worlds, Adam, but it sounds like if you'd been paying attention to Peterson and even Harris during that time, like that was IDW days, and it was like kind of the free speech, kind of the anti-woke thing that had started. So you were already kind of cooking on that stuff. And
Well,
is that right?
yeah, it's true, but it's funny looking at it retrospectively because, I've always had a sort of contrarian bent, troublemaker. And my parents were very libertarian nominally. And I hung out, at least my close friends were a little more irreverent in college. Like we were not politically correct and whatever.
Right.
But
most honest young men aren't.
yeah.
Choice.
And yeah, but it was, the weird thing is looking back, and I was getting exposed to Peterson and the so-called IDW. But when I was like blurting out at dinner parties and like saying the politically incorrect thing, I was in no way like, I don't think I was ever consciously trying to like imitate or emulate these sort of anti-woke left people. And I also don't think I had the wherewithal to like, own the libs with facts and logic either. Like I was just so bewildered and stressed out by like the tomfoolery and bullshit surrounding me. And especially in the environment where I grew up in, where I had like, it was not a political project. If anything, it was, I did get off on stirring the pot a little bit, but it was more just an act of desperation. Like I remember we had this big 3-bedroom house in San Diego, and her grad school friends would come over and they would say things, and I would just constantly blurt out like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Right.
And that was my honest, it was not like, I was not motivated by, it was not trollish. It was genuine desperation that like led me to that behavior. I should say.
So y'all both find yourself in like a desperate place, like you said. Wambui, you mentioned being in a, admitted into like a psych, something related to psych, and then or a mental health place, and Adam, you say you kind of you come to the end of this job, or you're let go, or whatever, and you have a break with reality. Like, what was the journey toward? What has been y'all's journey these last 2-3 years of finding solid things to build on in life?
I can go. Or boy,
Hey, you go first because I kind of followed on from you.
Let me just try and do it chronologically. So in 2018, the summer of 2018, we moved to California, and we're doing the back and forth, the Cayman Islands, New York, California, and I get like laid off in like December, like within months after like ostensibly building this, 8-figure corporation. And then I am still trying to pretend like I have it together. And so I'm doing yoga, and I'm really embracing the Sam Harris stuff. I'm in an intensive outpatient program, meaning I'm spending like 15 hours a week at a outpatient mental health facility. And I'm watching the personality and what's the other Peterson lecture that's not the biblical one? Maps of Meaning.
Yeah.
And Wambui is very dutifully, gainfully, painfully going through her MFA program. But I'm home all day, simultaneously trying to start a new startup, playing Madden. I was like top 0.01% at Madden at the time, and meditating like 3 to 5 hours a day. Just complete insanity. And then Wambui would come home, and I would just like machine gun speech at her, whatever had been I had no relationships outside. I'd given up on the Silicon Valley people. There was no way I was going to like integrate into her grad school friends. And I was like effectively like maybe psychotic, but at least like extremely manic, like completely unhinged. And over the course of that summer, our relationship at the time fell apart. And it was deeply painful, and we both were awful. And I personally don't want to get into all the details of that. But we were supposed to take a trip back to Hawaii in like I don't know if it was like February of 2020, but things were so strained. And so we broke up more or less. I took what was supposed to be a 2-week trip back to Hawaii. Wambui stayed in the apartment in San Diego. We broke up more or less within that month. And I was a complete like dysfunctional mess for 2.5 years, like extremely dysfunctional. I already had my narcolepsy and my bipolar disorder and all that, but I was also dealing with heartbreak and also grieving basically the last 8 years. And so all I did was watch like IDW and what was becoming TLC and do yoga and meditate and really just like grieve the whatever you want to call it, 6, 8, 10 years of absolute chaos that I was in. Like it was just, I woke up every day for at least 2 years and cried and like spent, my dad's coming into the house like right at this moment, but it'll be fine.
My son walked in earlier and I was like reaching over and saying hi to him. Sorry.
It's all good. Dad, I'm on the phone. Okay. Yeah, no, I spent at least 2 years, like every morning in a state of extreme emotional distress, like physically, somatically grieving for like hours at a time, on top of all my like physiological and physical health issues. And then simultaneously using whatever energy I had left to, you know, like maybe do some hot yoga or some like nominal socializing with friends from high school. But yeah, I spent 2 years grieving in deep pain, and at the same time trying to iron out like my belief structure. And you know, at this point I was starting to play with Christianity, and at the same time I was doing like 2.5 hours of Joe Dispenza manifestation meditations every day, and an hour of Dzogchen, and like involved in like online meditation groups, and like every sort of new agey self-help thing in the book. I was really trying to build a structured, deeply religious life. So I see actually a sort of clear narrative I can go from there. But like maybe Wambui, you want to fill in your side of those, say 2019 to like 2022. What was going on?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, I was still trying to be honest, I was trying to stay in the US for a lot of that time. And so as much as I was more and more over it with my program, and so I was doing this MFA program and also teaching at the university. So I had a job there, and this is one of the only ways, one of the only doable ways for someone like me to stay on I have a Kenyan passport only. So I kind of stayed in that world for much longer than I would have otherwise, because I just wanted to stay in the US. I liked living in San Diego as much as there were things I didn't like about it, way more than I wanted to live in Kenya.
A lot of people like living in San Diego.
Yeah, I actually do. We've had arguments about this, but I like San Diego.
SoCal for the win, you know, it's like a...
but there's another part about it that I completely forget to mention. But I had also, I took a year. So the last 2 years, I don't even remember, but I went to rehab at some point when I was in San Diego. And luckily, like my job at the university gave me really good insurance. So I kind of just did this rehab, like recovery hopping thing for the last little bit of when I was in San Diego. Maybe I'd say another way that I coped with all the dysfunction over all those years was like really wrestling with addiction as a coping mechanism I'd used since I was 12 years old. I think I started drinking when I was 12. That's another long story, but so maybe a semi-religious framework started to come in, or at least an alternative to all of the new age and like woke soup, when I like had to start going to AA, and there was a little bit of Christian language in that. I didn't actually think about that before, but perhaps. although in hindsight, I have my own like contentions and I've grappled a lot with that. But eventually I just had to leave. I had to leave that whole thing. I had to come back to Kenya. My visa ran out. Like I had no choice. And I kind of landed here. It was also like traumatic. I was born here, I'm from here, but I had no real connection to this place. And I never felt comfortable. So I'd say another something. I don't even entirely remember, but I did end up in rehab again, and then in a mental hospital, like offshoot of rehab thing. I just needed to be supervised. And that's when I started talking to Autumn again, I'm pretty sure. And then I just kind of picked up where Autumn did a lot of the hard work of wading through all of these different attempts at like creating an ontology. How would you describe it? All the meditation and the however you arrived at, like by the time we started talking, you were an inquirer, I think.
Yeah. So good. This is kind of where I wanted to pick it up. So I would say by like Dad. No, thank you. So I got lunch. Thank you. So I would say so I got back here in 2020, and then by 2022-ish, I had like done enough grieving. Like I was at the point when I got back here that I could not look like cashiers at the grocery store in the eye. Like there was just like so much shame and anxiety and dysfunction that like I did not know how to be a person at all. And after spending literally years like meditating and grieving, but probably by like late 2022, I was more like, I was out and about again. By the way, this whole time I was living at what we call Hanai, or like a calabash auntie's house. By the grace of God, I had a space to sort of grieve and do what I needed to do. But by that point, I was participating. I don't know, this has never been brought up in the corner, but I don't know if Christian, you've heard of this guy, Jeffrey A. Martin, or the fundamental well-being persistent non-symbolic experience. It's this crazy little pocket of like non-dual meditation online.
What's his name?
His name's Jeffrey A. Martin, and he runs something called the Institute for Persistent Non-Symbolic Experience. And this is a way of describing like non-dual enlightenment in very like pseudoscientific terms. But he runs these online programs that he kind of masquerades as studies. And I participate in one. It's called like 45 Days to Awakening. And every week you do a different type of meditation for at least an hour a day. And there's like an online sort of Facebook group, circle group component to it. And you're also doing all these like journaling exercises and whatnot. And the promise is that everybody is going to like experience a persistent change in their consciousness from this. So I joined one of these groups, and it was actually like, it was my first time having like real Sangha, in the sense, like real communion online. And so at this point, this is like 2022, I'm becoming more functional again. I'm actually in relationship with people, at least virtually. And I'm really like taking sort of left brain ownership over my life. And I've watched all of Peterson lectures. I'm at least like pretending to be Christian at the same time doing all this non-dual stuff, Vipassana, all sorts of self-help. And I build this system for myself where I'm actually managing my calendar in 5-minute intervals, 24 hours a day. I've built an API with my calendar that's processing this data so I can see how every minute of my day is spent. I'm getting like
efficiency bros, the Tim Ferriss coming in.
Yeah, like full like zenith of the Tim Ferriss ethos. Yeah. So I've got like, I'm getting like 2 or 3 hours on the cushion a day, 14 hours of exercise a week, like this much time in Sangha, virtual or in person, very involved in my hot yoga studio, working, doing creative work every day. Like I've mastered like the Nietzschean power, like will to power in my own life. And I'm also listening to Vervaeke at this time at some point. So I'm like, I need an ecology of practices, right? Like I have breath, movement, mindfulness, concentration, dialectical, like it's all there. And I'm like, I'm doing the thing. And I also have service. Like I'm looking for ways to like, charitably give my time and energy to the world around me. And I'm fasting, intermittent fasting, whatever. And then it just becomes plainly obvious to me, like, oh, I could just join a church and 80-90% of this like insane administrative load is just off my shoulders. And it just became very obvious to me after having done it myself, like successfully, after having built my own religion successfully, like the most obvious and easy thing to do for me. And I think it was like, this was at the exact same time, right? Jordan was in North Carolina and he like saw the thing he had been looking for. These people were like embodying it. It was a very sort of congruent thing for me when I looked at my life and like just the sheer administrative load of trying to like keep up the ecology of practices, like participate in community, and to do this in a regimented, repeatable, calendared way. It just became so obvious. It was like, oh, this is what the church is for. And it was, in the spirit of voluntary necessity. Like I was just compelled. There was no other option but to join a church at that point. So
at some point did if you were a catechumen and if you've gone through and been baptized, there was like a point then that there's like worship, like, because that's kind of a, creating God. And even some of Wambui, I don't know if this was, Chad, who has a channel in the corner, Flotilla channel. Has done a lot of 12-step. He still is a big 12-step person. And that language around the God of your understanding, I don't know if that's part of what frustrates you, but like, and he's a Christian now, and he had to kind of walk through that. He still sees a lot of benefit of 12-step work, and even what it was founded on. But it is interesting that what you were describing, Adam, is just kind of like, you can do that in therapy. You can do that in 12-step program. You can even create your own individualized version of you being the God of your own understanding, in a sense of like how, and it is the journey in, and I think there's a place for understanding the self, but it's not the destination. Destination is ultimately, worship beyond you. And, in the Christian faith, that's Christ. And so was there then like, so the embodiment, the practices, was there a place where faith began to kind of come into play related to the divine in your life? Like, was that part of that journey?
Me or Homeboy?
Either one. Go for it.
Wait, can I just explain how it first happened? Well, I told you the story about the you need Jesus thing.
Yeah.
And then started talking to Adam. He actually sent me the book of Job, like an
Stephen Mitchell. The Stephen Mitchell annotated.
And I read that. I think when I was still at the mental hospital, and my first inkling of faith, I think I would say, was this understanding, reading this text of, oh, I don't get to determine what fairness means or like right judgment. I didn't have any, that's the only thing I can say about it. It was just, I was in this place where I was so like, can I swear?
There's been a few fly already. It's okay. These all go out as explicit on iTunes. So it's fine.
Yeah, I just was, I was like so fucked and doomed that like I really did. And I felt I had also been taught throughout all of the stuff we've mentioned before that it was my right to feel victimized, and that, like life had been really unfair. And I was this victim of all this traumatic stuff. And then on top of that, like colonialism, and there was every reason to be, to feel like the world is just so unfair. Like why even bother to try and feel okay in this like terrible world where I'm clearly, if there is a God, he can't love me, because why would this be my lot, essentially? And so that reading that, I don't even remember like the words passing through my brain, but I remember finishing, and I just finished it so I could say to Adam that I'd finished it, and just thinking, or not having like an embodied understanding of, oh, I have no idea what good means. I have no idea what fair means. I don't get to determine good and bad and right and wrong. And that's God's business. And that was kind of the entryway, I guess, into something like faith. And then I was also developing the way that Adam and we didn't like fall in love again. There was just a day. There was a point one day where we both it dawned on us that we were supposed to get married. But anyway, even before that, I think I probably did have some kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, but I was willing to listen to, I trusted Adam. And so I kind of just did what he told me to do. And that led me to the Orthodox Church. It's not, I mean, no, I'm your wife. So
real feminist of you. Just listen to the man.
Oh my gosh. That's exactly what I did. And that's exactly what I should have done. And that's what I should do a lot of the time. But I did, and it worked. So I don't like, when I was saying before that Autumn did a lot of the like heavy lifting and trying to figure it out, there wasn't much figuring out at that point for me. I had a series of, I guess I would say, like religious experiences, or like completely out of my control. And then I did the next clear thing to do. And I had given up on my own will enough, just by being like, just by suffering enough. And so at that point, I didn't feel like there was much thinking left to do. Becoming Orthodox was not an intellectual exercise for me at all. Yeah.
I think that's important. Faith is not, it's kind of not an intellectual exercise ultimately, and you mentioned you decided to trust Adam, which is really beautiful. And it's, gosh, I even feel the cultural voice in my head saying like, like, oh, that's going to sound patriarch, all that stuff. Like, it's just so in there, but I think it's really, and Adam, just hearing your story, like what that does for you to hear that after what you've been through is probably very powerful. It's powerful for me to hear, just to hear that, say, she trusts me, she believes in me, that I can try to lead her to something I believe is good. And, I think that's really great.
Well, thank you. I mean, I hear that voice in my head too. It's funny because when we started talking again, I was like, I am not gonna, what's the word, proselytize to her. Like, I was gonna tell her what I was doing. I was gonna say, yeah, you might want to check it out. But Wambui actually got baptized before I did, which is the crazy thing about all of it. And so, I'd like to think, you shall know them by your fruits. I think maybe whatever it was, I was, by the grace of God, embodying at the time when Wambui said, I want some of that. But I never really tried to pitch it to her at that time. But she, I'm honored and flattered. I don't know what to say. I'm a little creeped out that she followed me. I mean, it's a beautiful thing.
God told me to. It wasn't that you
thank you. That makes me feel
God told me to listen to you.
Yeah. And I wanted to add, on top of all of that, like, the question you asked earlier, Christian, was there a moment that led to faith? I spent a lot of time in like my hot yoga studio, which a dear friend of mine owns. And I'm still a participant in that community, and I have a lot of friends that I love there. But I was really immersed in that, being there every day. We had a lot of community events, a lot of socializing, and with all due respect to the many people I love, like, it was just becoming so explicit to me that was not it. And that environment I was in, that yoga studio, was the closest thing to a church that I had and most of those people had. And I'll even go so far as to say it was a much better church than like most of the churches I knew of. There was real communion happening there. And yet it was such a facsimile, or there was something so deeply comical about it. I understood that being a part of a community like that, where I was actually participating liturgically in a like sex dance at 6 a.m. with everybody, we were sweating and listening to like profane hip hop. Like I understood liturgy in that sense. Like I understood that that exercise was binding us together, that there was real love there, albeit like a bit pagan and goofy. All the sort of things I experienced in a yoga studio, all this, at least a beta or alpha version of what a church might do. Like,
Right.
And so I was in that environment, and yet it was like deeply comical and like utterly bizarre. And frankly, the soteriology of like all the people there, like I'm chief among sinners, but like, you know, the yoga teachers, whether they're 60 or 22, like they're not moral exemplars. Something about being in that environment and saying, okay, I'm going to church anyway. Why don't I go to one that actually is explicit about its values? Actually, it just became, yeah, there was no choice for me. It just became so obvious that like that was the better alternative. That was the real deal. And I brought all this up in relation to like moments of faith, but I think I had been sold enough at that point through listening to Peugeot and I guess just people in the corner that like if I go, I noticed that when I was going to the yoga studio, and I still am, but like at that time, I was catching the beliefs of those people. Like I was like whether I liked it or not, the sort of yogic spiritual narcissism was like sinking its claws into me, and so it became obvious to me like, oh, if I just go to church, I will probably be able to have faith, because I'll catch their beliefs.
Well,
So
that's also an act of faith, the choice to do that, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so important and very interesting that the way that you frame that with like the liturgical language and you know, you've mentioned the corner, you mentioned Peugeot, you mentioned Vervaeke, and you know, some conversations with Jordan Hall, and I hear some echoes of his journey. We're like, I mean, obviously from the West Coast stuff, but also like just coming to the end of something, looking for something. You're even talking about like the wholesomeness aspect related to these, you know, what my hot yoga's like versus, and even just your adolescence and all those experiences. Like, where's the good? Where is the good? You know, it's like, okay. And so the thing that I think is interesting is also this, though, I've listened to, you know, a lot of Jordan's conversations around communion, and one of the things where, and I think it's interesting with this, with the relationship to meditative practices and stuff, that there is this kind of, I don't know the right word, but there is more relationship-ish with something like sacred in a way, like meditative practices, like aiming at something that's serene or you know, I don't really know, but I am curious about like your feelings related to worship now, how like using the word and the language around communion with also something about Eucharist and Christian communion, and like, because you're saying I'm still like in this communion at this level. Like, is that something that you look at as like these kind of the fractal thing? Because that's something that I've experienced, but I was just curious if that's what you're kind of describing.
Yeah, Wambui, do you have anything to say on that? Because otherwise I'm going to ramble here. So when we talk about these levels of communion, that's something I've very actively been thinking about these past few months. And it's actually something I'm really struggling with. So if you'll allow me to sort of stumble out loud, that was kind of my pitch at Paul's Estuary a couple of weeks ago, was, and I wasn't trying to be prescriptive so much as I was trying to be descriptive. And so the magical thing about growing up in a community like Hawaii is there is this near instantaneous ability for total strangers to commune under the Aloha spirit, which is I had a conversation with Jordan where he identified this explicitly as a Elohim, and that he's encountered as well. And so that's one relational capacity to go into strangers in speech and through either pidgin English or body language or whatever it is to effectively and efficiently enter into communion with the cashier or whatever. And it's not that you can't do that with the guy at the bodega in Brooklyn. It's just, this is happening at a scale. And that's a form of deeply relating. I guess the sense there is I can spend extended time with this complete stranger and know it instantaneously. Now, we may not get real deep, but there's this sense of we're on the same team. And another way of describing that is like, I don't know if you've been like at a football game where your team's the underdog and you win and you're just relating to 25,000 or 50,000 strangers. Like that level of like euphoric communion is afforded to me like on a daily basis with total strangers. And obviously that's not like the be all end all of binding.
It's one level of a cultural religio. Yes.
Well said. So there's that. And then, so I'll just kind of go through my pitch here because I think it's actually deeply relevant. The second thing I said was this capacity to actually enter into dialogos, to not dialogue, exchange of information, but like a mutually transformative conversation guided by an angel of the conversation. So let's put a pin on that one. And then I said there's a third thing, which is the willingness and will to actually participate in explicitly binding rituals like the Eucharist and liturgy. And then the fourth thing I suggested is something like holding space in the New Age, like meaning that deep embodied capacity for grief and the ability to extend that relationally to someone else. And the reason, the sort of second part of my pitch that I didn't make on the show, but I wanted to make on the estuary, but I did want to bring up, is I look around and maybe 30% of the 1 million people on my island, I can have that first level of cultural religio. And then if we take the participate in communion or Eucharist or liturgy, I have a church of 200 people here, another big church in Kenya that I can actively participate in. And I can even go to my father's Episcopalian church and like really feel that. The third thing, dialogos. Okay, maybe there's 4 or 5 or 6 people now with the corner that I can regularly and reliably enter into dialogos with. And then the fifth thing, like holding space, the ability to like grieve together, to feel deeply together.
Empathy to a degree.
Yes. Yeah. Empathy to a degree. Yeah. Yes. There's maybe 1 or 2 people I can really are safe for that. Maybe I can go to my priest, a shrink, my wife. I won't subject her to that usually. And maybe like one or 2 other friends. And then the interesting thing about that is of the people I can do all 4 of those forms of relating with, there's like 1. I think it's my wife, and I wouldn't subject her to like my grief usually. I wouldn't ask her to be my mom, generally speaking. So I forget what you asked initially, but I've really been grappling with this because I think in an optimally relating church or body, we should be able to do all those things. And I'll give you another anecdote or maybe throw a wrench in everything, but I'm going to a Russian Orthodox church here. And it's a far drive for Hawaii. It's 30 minutes. And I love the church. It's a deeply, deeply spiritual place. The priest is Hawaiian. It's kind of a famous church in the Russian Orthodox Church. And I feel the spirit there. It's very intense. But I'll be frank and forgive me for saying this. It's that Russian ethnos is very deep, and I do not actually feel the aloha spirit there. And it's a really weird contrast where I enter in this community and experience through the liturgy and through communion this deep sense of binding, incredibly spiritually intense, indistinguishable from heroic amounts of psychedelics at times. And yet the same thing that I experience with my cashier at the grocery store, I do not experience there. And so I've really been struggling with that disparity and that dichotomy. And the people like I'll shout out Gray Hamilton, who I just spoke to yesterday. We've been texting for a while, but Gray and I seem to be able to instantly enter into dialogos. Now, if you ask me about that first level of cultural religio, entering into the aloha spirit, as far as I'm concerned, Gray is still a dumb haole. Like, he's still a dumb white boy, and he won't be able to do that, like, probably ever in his life. Now, we might be on some other team, some corner team, but there's all these disparities within these levels, these fractal levels of relating, and it freaks me out.
That's so interesting. Do you have anything Wambui related?
Do you mind just repeating your initial question?
Yeah,
I know it was
I
about
guess
communion and
it was,
Eucharist.
yeah, it was about fractal levels of communion, and do they kind of go up, or like, I don't know, like how do you relate to that? Is I think theologically, you know, there's this idea that the way that we would approach Christ in communion would be like at the highest, and the way that sometimes people, I think, will describe that is sometimes more horizontally, and some people will describe it more vertically. Something like I experienced Christ in this relationship, or I experienced Christ in this kind of holy moment or something. But yeah, I'm just curious, because that's part of what I'm making a pitch for a conversation at this point. We kind of like have told the story, and so we've got a little bit of time here, and I just wanted to kind of offer up something in similar that I continue to process.
Yeah. I don't know how to articulate it well, but I do think what Adam was describing in his pitch is a way of answering that question, or at least has helped me to grapple with, maybe this might be a completely different thing, but grapple with, I do feel a deep sense of communion within my church, which is within Kenya, but I do not feel anything like what Adam experiences in Hawaii in terms of communion with under the Aloha spirit with random people in his community. I did feel some degree of that I've been to Hawaii a bunch of times when we were together. I instantly felt something like that there. And when I began to participate in the communion of my church here, I was like, oh, this is similar to that thing I felt when I went to Hawaii, but haven't felt since. But then I've also just been like sad a lot about the fact that I don't have many friends. And Adam and I have been discussing this, and I guess maybe Adam, you can like make that connection more clearly, but I think we've been doing some sort of mutual recognition and like grieving over how lacking some aspects of those categories he just described have been in our entire lives, especially dialogos within, just like even the people that were the closest to me and like my family and my people I've described as friends before. There is a relational capacity that just was, I didn't even recognize it as so lacking until I started talking to Adam again, and also experienced just participating in the corner in the like really small ways that I have, just recognizing like, oh, there's a whole other way to engage in conversation, and that whatever's happening there, it does not happen in a lot of my relationships. And then I don't think that many people who have this embodied like capacity to hold space for grief. I don't know if I understand something deeper in that I can't quite explain, but I don't think that answered the question about communion.
No, I think it does.
Well, but yeah.
It sounds like identifying different layers of communion relationship. I've described something like this. I live in a town I grew up in, very small, and to some degree, Adam, I have a little bit of like, I can get into this, hey, I'm a redneck from Arkansas, hillbilly, like this Sunday, a group of people from church were at the sandbar at the river, and we had four-wheelers and a cookout, and we got kids of all ages, and it's people I went to high school with, and it's just very like, woof, we're right there. There's a level of community and communion. People that I have gone to church with for over a decade. but it's a very relaxed atmosphere. It's not, something transcendent in that way. But it's very deep. And then sometimes when I have tried to describe the difference between friendship and kinship, even within like blood relationships, because Wambui, you mentioned just being with your family. I've had this experience, again, being from this town that I'm from, when my brother moved back here and our kids are all around the same age, it's like, if say I got sick or my wife got sick and our kids were going to the same elementary school, it was so much easier to call my brother or his wife and be like, hey, can you grab my son and bring him home? Asking a friend to do that feels a little bit like I don't feel like I'm imposing onto my brother in a way that is kind of familial in kinship. Or if, like to ask my parents or my in-laws to do that. And so there's these different dynamics at play. But then, I have had some dialogical conversations here. I've had them in person. One of them was at Midwest Estuary with Jordan and a new friend that I made there. And we were just all of a sudden we were like at this place and we were talking about like this thing. It was almost like, how did we just boom and we're there and it's like we're all articulating around some kind of shared knowledge, some kind of shared like intellectual framework that you can't fake or you can't easily enter into with maybe a friend that hasn't listened to 200 hours of Jordan Peterson and 150 hours of John Vervaeke and like these that you then are entering into like that philosophical space, the dialectical space, and then there's like these fractals of the table or the altar. Several months ago, when I think it was Notre Dame, they rebuilt the altar. And it was
with the upside down.
Yeah, and Jonathan gave Jonathan Peugeot gave a really nice articulation about kind of the symbolism of the altar.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really, really helpful for me as a I say a dirty Protestant here in the South, thinking about, because some Presbyterians will call it the table, and then but what's happening at the dinner table and what's happening by yourself at work if you're having a meal and you say a prayer to God of thanks and then you take your food, like, and then you're with your family and then you're with your church and then you're like, hey, there's kind of like these on that level, because that word communion is used for Eucharist as well in in certain traditions, and so that has been a just one of the ideas, and maybe I picked up on that from remembering your on the estuary, but then estuary is trying to like create this protocol for conversation and to get to that place, and the other aspect of it is just this I don't know, the whenever I was at Midwest Estuary, I went to the Automata Supra with John Heers, and you have Orthodox, you've got Protestants, you've got Catholics, you've got non-theists, John Vervaeke, you've got like all these people there, and it's this beautiful ceremony and stories and toasts and fun and tears and all these things. And like one of the toasts that I made was about communion, because like this is one layer of it. This is one reality of it. But it's not one, it's not we can't mistake it for this, and we shouldn't try to mistake it for something lower than it is. And I don't know, that has just been a very present idea in conversation, and we hadn't kind of gotten to like the actual like your worship life to it in an explicit part of the conversation, but we talking about all these like isolation and grief and you're being in another country. And even right now, like Wambui is what you were talking about, like in the small amount of participation now that you've done in this space through the digital, there's just a lot going on that wasn't going on 10 years ago, I don't think. And it's just really exciting to kind of be a part and to get to connect with you guys. So, we're kind of closing down on time, but I don't know if there was anything else. We've got a few more minutes that y'all were curious to bring up, or kind of any parts of your story that you haven't got to share that you maybe would like to share with people that are listening.
Can I just say one thing? And then I really want to hear Adam comment on what you just said, because I think he could probably say what I mean more articulately. But I do think we're talking about coming into alignment with a spirit at different levels. And I won't even try and connect these points. That's one thing. And then I also coming into alignment with the correct spirit at different levels. And then also that if you were to ask me what, like why Adam and I get along, or why I love my husband, I would say that we're both, I know that he's like earnestly and honestly in pursuit of wisdom and truth. Mm-hmm. And I feel that thing, like it's a texture in different areas of my life at different levels. But usually, as long as we're all doing that thing in whatever group I'm in, of one or two, it doesn't happen often, honestly. But I can enter into something resembling like dialogos, I guess, or like something that comes to feel like the texture of communion. Although obviously, like communion in my church is a whole different thing, but also the same thing. But yeah, I'm just, that's all I know for sure. But it definitely is I'm glad you brought it up, because it definitely is a question I'm grappling with, like for real, I think for the first time in my life. Like I've asked myself a lot, like, I wonder why I don't have more friendships that feel real. But I'm asking the question now in a way that feels more real, and it feels like a slightly different question. And I think it has something to do with communion, and I think it has something to do with aligning with the correct spirit, and I think it has something to do with, like, yeah, honestly pursuing wisdom. So yeah, Adam, I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
Christian, you got 5 minutes? How much?
I got 5 minutes.
Okay, let's see if we can truncate this. Yeah, everything Wambui just said really strikes a nerve. I would say that there's this triangulation between liturgy and skole and leisure, divine worship and leisure that I really feel deeply called to by the Logos right now in my conversations with my wife here today, with Gray, with others. What Wambui just said about loving, like she trusts me or whatever, is able to enter into dialogos because she trusts that I am a lover of wisdom. That feeling certainly mutual, and I would say it's true of just about like every interaction I've had in the corner. And I was actually going to say before she said that the thing that makes I guess it's called a Tamita work with John Heers and Verveki and Joe and whomever else is there is, I would suspect the thing that makes that work is the love of wisdom of everybody at that table. There was a conversation between Jordan Hall, John Verveki, and I think a guy named Ian something. They were talking about trust in the catalytic community, and that idea came up of loving wisdom. I actually recently suggested in an email, by the way, I'm not like super close to Jordan or anything. I've talked to him. I know that's like come up a number of times. I don't want to be overplaying my hand, but I recently emailed him about this notion of shared skole as the foundation of any catalytic community, or any community that's going to establish scaling fractal or growing fractal levels of trust. And I really think there's a lot more to unpack there with this relationship between liturgy and leisure. Leisure effectively being a form of divine worship, or actively affirming the world as it is and wanting to live in relationship to the totality of it. That is leisure. And that is the same thing, I think, or there's a congruency there with the loving of wisdom, which is, I think that act of leisure, that act of divine worship. I'm heavily informed right now by Joseph Piper's Leisure, the Basis of Culture. He also wrote a book called Only the Lover Sings that really gets into this notion of skole. But the act of leisure, the philosophical act or the act of divine worship, is an act of affirming the world as it is. And I think that's an act of deep humility that is at the basis of wisdom. And I'm not claiming to have mastered that, but I think that's actually the prerequisite for anything, like for any of those, at least the dialogos element, but probably any of those 4 relational levels we listed earlier. So that's something I really want to unpack. I'm actively doing right now. Something between leisure, liturgy, skole. I think that is the seed. Did that help?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of was, I don't know if I wasn't thinking that, but when I was kind of describing like going to church on Sunday and then having that kind of cookout on the river, like there was no pressure. There was no impetus to just be there, but to be there. And for people, like there wasn't a program. There wasn't, It just, people showed up, people had food, people were, and it was a relaxing, beautiful Sunday afternoon. And we are inundated, one of the West's cultural sicknesses related to like productivity and efficiency. And I think that plays a part in like trying to wrap our minds around leisure is very difficult in connection to nature or to each other, even, that's not super transactional. So, man, I just wanted to play with that a little bit, but guys, I appreciate y'all responding to the invitation to come and share your story with those that are paying attention to this little corner of the internet here on the Yours Truly podcast. So if you're listening out there and you're still there, I encourage anybody to leave a comment and connect. And I know Adam and Wambui will be there over the next few days once this releases to maybe engage some that way and continue to make those little connections here in the digital space we know as this little corner of the internet. So guys, thank y'all for being here today. We'll close this thing out backstage.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christian.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.